The military. Everyone knows them, and everyone makes fun of them for being disorganized, under-equipped, underpowered, grossly incompetent, alcoholic. Well, actually, I don't think anyone in the zone can fault anyone else for drinking too much. The reason the military have become a meme of incompetence is because they suffer severe failures whenever conducting operations inside the zone. So today, we ask the question, what were the operations the militaries conducted in the zone? What went wrong during each one? And at the end, we'll discuss a little theory as to what the military could do to be more effective in the zone. Disclaimer: this video will only focus on the lore of the original trilogy. There will be no inclusion of S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. In regards to the original S.T.A.L.K.E.R lore, the bulk of military forces stay outside the zone, but the military quote-unquote faction roughly breaks down into three categories. Army Regulars. These soldiers guard and patrol the borders of the zone and occupy the border checkpoints in and out of the zone. These guys usually have pretty low morale, mediocre equipment, and you've probably heard their commander drunkenly shouting into the speaker at the cordon checkpoint. Military Stalkers. Military Stalkers are elite units of the military, all of whom have tangible experience inside the zone. Formed from veteran troops or former stalkers who have signed a contract with the military. Military Stalkers are used to map the zone, patrol certain territory, and clear sectors of well-entrenched enemies. Spetsnaz units. Spetsnaz units are some of the best equipped units the military has thrown at the zone, and they are used for special, high-priority operations inside the zone. They were involved in the Chernobyl assault in Shadow Chernobyl, as well as occupying Pripyat in Call of Pripyat. So now that we have a very rough understanding of how the military structure breaks down, what exactly were the operations conducted by the military during the events of the original trilogy? The first major operation in the lore is Operation Monolith. Operation Monolith was conducted after the Mark I, aka S.T.A.L.K.E.R, we'll be referring to him as S.T.A.L.K.E.R from now on, after S.T.A.L.K.E.R deactivated the Brain Scorcher during the events of Shadow Chernobyl. The commander of Operation Monolith is known only by the call sign Quartet, and is on the ground at the CNPP to command on the front line. Operation Monolith involved 8 air assault teams, call signs Peregrine, Kite, Hawk, Kestrel, Falcon, Vulture, Harrier, and Buzzard, as well as a sniper team, call sign Owl. In addition, there were 3 armored ground units, call signs Armadillo 1, 2, and 3. The military knew in advance that no faction inside the zone had armored vehicles, but they did expect 70 to 100 enemy personnel. The heaviest resistance was expected at the main bridge to the power plant, the main gate, and the road along the main building. The military expected the enemy to deploy heavy weapons such as RPGs and Gauss rifles, and for there to be heavy sniper fire from the enemies along the rooftops of the various buildings at the CNPP. Initially, the military sent Spetsnaz unit, call sign Boar, to the Red Forest and the Brain Scorcher. Both were easily secured due to most of the Monolith having been killed by S.T.A.L.K.E.R beforehand. A recon helicopter was shot down over Pripyat. 4 would survive the main crash, but were killed by Monolith forces while attempting to link up with the main military assault. A second crashed helicopter can be found at the stadium, as well as Spetsnaz troops, most probably survivors. The main assault hit the CNPP with several Mi-24 Hinds and BTR-70 APCs. In response, the Monolith defenders deployed Gauss rifles and RPGs. The APCs and troop transport trucks, bottlenecked at the bridge, are quickly attacked and destroyed. At least 24 bodies can be found at the initial battle site, and what troops survived their destruction began intense ground combat. Quick side note, although wrecks of T-64 tanks can be found at the CNPP, these are from the initial military force that occupied the zone. These abandoned tanks can be found all over the zone and were not used in Operation Monolith. Not too long after, Hinds showed up and began to both strafe the CNPP with rockets and chain gun fire. After softening up Monolith defenders, the Hinds began landing their squads. Helicopter 6-4 is promptly shot down by a Monolith RPG. Helicopter 65 attempts to land and flies into an electronic anomaly, killing all on board. Despite these setbacks, Spetsnaz units Peregrine and Hawk secure the main bridge. The two units move on to the next objective, linking up with Kite, who was holding the main gate but under heavy Monolith attack. At this time, Falcon had landed by the gate, reinforcing the push west down the road towards the power plant entrance. In the northern area of the plant, Buzzard is dropped off by helicopter, but this unit is not seen in game. Helicopter 18 drops off Kestrel to assist the push to the entrance of the plant before being hit by ground fire and is forced to fly out of the area. At this point in the battle, the military, while having taken the losses, has been fairly successful. Ground troops have secured the bridge and the main gate and are now pushing towards the plant entrance. Air support has been shredding Monolith fighters on the rooftops and on the ground. However, this would quickly change as an imminent emission is detected. Air units 48 and 49 retreat immediately while ground forces continue their assault to the final objective. At this point, Operation Monolith starts to fall apart rapidly. Helicopter 97 quickly drops off Sniper Unit Owl before attempting to retreat, but is shot down. Helicopter 31 is hit and an engine takes severe damage. Helicopter 98 is shot down, and Vulture sends out a distress call for support in the face of fanatical Monolith assault. Their fate is sealed, however, by the beginning of the emission. The plan is abandoned and the soldiers now desperately fight to get indoors to cover. Quartet, the operation commander, is killed and the ground troops are left fighting leaderless, and then the emission occurs. To sum up, Operation Monolith, while initially promising, ends in total failure, with the exception of the helicopters that retreated and perhaps Spetsnaz Unit Boar at the Brain Scorcher. None of the units survived, and more than 36 vehicle wrecks can be found at the CNPP. The second named, albeit smaller, operation is Operation Fairway. Shortly after the failure of Operation Monolith, a second operation was devised that would entail a full-scale invasion of the zone, to capture and possibly destroy the CNPP. The first phase of the plan was called Operation Fairway. It called for a vanguard assault of 5 helicopters, call signs Stingray 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, to land 5 Spetsnaz units consisting of about 40 to 60 men in Chernobyl, and establish a beachhead for further streams of troops to land at. When all 5 helicopters fail to return and no distress calls were being shot down or sent, military command pauses the next phase of the invasion and decides to investigate. At this point, Major Alexander Dikhtyarev is sent into the zone undercover to investigate the fate of the Stingray helicopters, search for survivors, and retrieve any mission-critical information. We all know how that turned out in Call of Pripyat. Dikhtyarev finds the helicopters, gathers survivors, teams up with the main man S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and extracts all of them from the zone. Beyond that, there are a few smaller, unnamed, unwitnessed operations, only mentioned in lore drops and conversations. For instance, there was an operation the founder of Duty, General Tachenko, was a part of. An operation to paradrop troops onto the CNPP. Oblivious to the dangers of the zone, many of the soldiers were killed quickly upon landing, and the rest were scrambled by an emission. Another instance is the military attack on the Agaprom sector to gain access to the files there in the underground tunnels. Also, between the events of Clear Sky and Shadow of Chernobyl, there was an attempt to secure control of Lab X-16 in Yantar that failed when a Monolith force arrived at the lab. Finally, there was a raid in 2011 described in the PDA Encyclopedia as, quote, "The Army, including Special Forces headed by paramilitary stalker detachments, launched a massive raid deep into the zone. Their objective was to break through the Chernobyl NPP and wipe out the cause of the anomalous fields, or at least obtain first-hand information on the current state of affairs. This endeavor, involving over 1,000 people and heavy machinery, was a complete failure. Isolated groups of survivors were forced to settle within the zone with slender hopes of rescue. This would most likely explain the presence of armored troop transports and tanks scattered across the zone, as well as the abundance of snorks, who are said to have been soldiers once. So let's analyze what we know. What did the military do right? What went wrong? And what would they need to make future operations successful? So the military does get some things right. Obviously, their technology is a winning asset. Their enclosed armor suits and ability to emission-proof some of their vehicles puts them a big step above others in the zone. Their helicopters allow them to fly over anomalous fields on the ground and offer air support to any ground troops. And finally, we have to recognize that the military troops, both Army regulars and Special Forces units, have way more combat training than, say, the average hoodlum. So where did they go wrong? Well, the biggest failing of the military's attacks in the zone is that they lacked accurate intelligence. Strelick explains as much to Diktyrev in Call of Pripyat, that the military doesn't know the anomalies change positions with every mission, so any maps that they had are outdated. Also, while using helicopters to ferry troops over the dangers of the zone towards the center does make the journey across the zone safer, it leaves a considerable gap of time between when troops are landed in a combat zone and when the next wave of reinforcements can arrive. Not to mention all the resupplies have to be flown in over the same distance. On top of that, the number of soldiers who have actual, tangible experience surviving and fighting inside the zone is very limited. The zone is a place where the laws of nature don't always flow in a coherent manner, so standard military training will only get you so far. So the military's biggest failings are 1. Critical lack of intelligence. 2. The travel distance between troops fighting in the zone and reinforcements from outside the zone. And 3. Lack of experienced troops. So how can this be remedied? Well, 1. Establishing a spy network inside the zone would do wonders for them. Similar to Major Diktyrev, undercover agents or perhaps sources paid to inform could be set up like a web inside the zone, reporting on faction movements, anomaly field positions, mutant types, etc., etc., etc. This alone would give them a vastly improved understanding of the zone. 2. If the military is going to stick with flying troops over the zone to operation areas, I don't know of any way to mitigate the reinforcement delay. Military history has shown us several times that dropping troops in enemy territory is extremely dangerous. The tactics shown in the S.T.A.L.K.E.R games reminds me of the Battle of Ladrang Valley. American forces were dropped in a hostile area and had to defend themselves while helicopters returned to base, picked up more soldiers, and then flew back. It's an insanely risky way to wage war. 3. How do we make up for the lack of experienced troops? The easy answer is to just say, have more patrols in the zone. Just send more guys in there, and then, they get experience that way. But this would leave them open to losing as many green soldiers as they would gain experienced ones. I would suggest the military take control of a sector somewhere in the zone and turn it into secure territory, free of other factions, wandering in. Then, turn that territory into a training ground. Troops could experience the terrain, the anomalies, perhaps even some wildlife in a semi-controlled way. This would at least give them the very basic experience of life inside the zone. So that's it. We've covered what military operations took place in the zone, both named and unnamed. We covered what they do well, what they failed to do, and what they could do better. So what do you think? Could the military learn from their mistakes and be the one to finally assume control over the zone? Leave your suggestions below. Give the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more content coming in the future. I'm the Zone Operator. Thanks for watching.